The envelope was heavy, the kind made to impress. Gold embossed with a wax seal as if a royal decree had been issued. I almost laughed. Of course, Lawton's engagement dinner would be announced like a coronation. I held it for a few seconds before opening it. Part of me already knew what it would say. Inside on cream cardstock, the script read, "You are cordially invited to celebrate the engagement of Lawton Maddox and Cecily Prescott." The location was printed in smaller font, but it might as well have screamed. The Bellwether, my restaurant. For a long moment, I just stared at it. The irony had claws. 5 years of silence. 5 years of vague holiday cards and clipped birthday texts. And now, out of all the fine dining venues in Charleston, my family had chosen mine, unaware I had built it from the ground up. The easiest choice would have been to ignore the invitation, toss it into the trash, like they had done with my dreams. But something in me paused. I thought of the girl I was the day I walked out of their world, 25, tired of pretending, carrying nothing but a small suitcase, and a voice no one wanted to hear. They had called me reckless, ungrateful. My mother, Blythe, had clutched her pearls like I had suggested robbing a bank instead of attending culinary school. My father said nothing at all, just poured another drink. Lawton didn't look up from his phone. Now they were dining under my roof, sipping from stemware I had selected soon to taste food born from hands they said weren't made for work. I ran my fingers over the invitation one last time, then set it down beside my knife roll. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about pride. It was about presence. I had earned the right to be in that room, whether they knew it or not. I reached into my closet and pulled out the black dress. Simple, sharp. The one that said, "I'm not here to impress you. I'm here because I no longer need to." The fabric felt steady against my skin as I zipped it up. The mirror showed a woman they wouldn't recognize, and that was the point. I stepped out the door and headed toward the Bellwether. Savannah never let you forget who you were supposed to be. In our neighborhood, heritage mattered more than heart. Lawn parties were battlegrounds in silk and seersucker, and my parents, Kenneth and Blythe Maddox, wore their lineage like armor. Our family crest hung in the foyer like a warning legacy, first feelings later. Lawton played the role perfectly. He was born with the Maddox jawline, the politician's handshake, and a resume tailored for Ivy League brochures. Marin, always a step behind him, but just as polished, mastered the performance of charm and thinly veiled cruelty by 13. They moved through the world like they owned it, and in Savannah that was almost true. I never quite figured out where I fit in. I wasn't rebellious, not in the screaming, slamming doors kind of way. I just drifted toward the kitchen when no one was looking. Inez ran it like a cathedral, quiet, reverent, everything in its place. She wasn't family by blood, but in that house, she was the only one who ever really saw me. When I was 10, she let me dice onions beside her. I cried through every cut, but Inez never told me to stop. "You got steady hands, baby," she said. "The kind that make people feel safe when you cook." I started sneaking cookbooks under my pillow, watching reruns of old culinary competitions like bedtime stories. My mother found me piping choux pastry at midnight once. She didn't ask how I learned. She just said Mitchell's hire chefs. They don't become them. By the time I was 21, I knew I had to go. The weight of their expectations was smothering every part of me that felt alive. I packed a duffel bag, withdrew the last $2,000 from my college account, and left a note on the mahogany desk in my father's study. It said simply, "I love you, but I can't be this version of me anymore." They didn't chase me. Not once. 5 years later, I stood outside the Bellwether with steady hands and a full heart. My name wasn't on the awning, but my fingerprints were on every inch of this place. I stepped inside and let the familiar scent of seared rosemary and brown butter guide me toward the table where the Maddoxes were already seated. The maitre d' greeted me with a subtle nod, a signal of quiet recognition. He said nothing else, just gestured toward the main dining room with the same professional grace he extended to every guest. It was exactly what I needed. Tonight I wasn't Chef Maddox. I was Elira, the middle child, with nothing to prove and no one left to impress. They had, of course, claimed the best table center of the room under the hand-blown glass chandelier I'd commissioned from a local artisan. Maren sat with her back straight and her earrings louder than her voice. Lawton looked up briefly from his phone, then returned to scrolling. My parents were already mid-conversation, likely about country club renovations or someone's unfortunate second divorce. "Elira," my mother said, rising halfway from her seat with a practiced air kiss. "You made it." "Would have been a shame to miss your first engagement dinner," I replied, taking the only open chair. Second, technically, Maren chimed in with a too-sweet smile. "But who's counting?" My father poured me a glass of wine without asking. A Cabernet, not what paired with the opening course, but I said nothing. Maren's eyes flicked over my dress. "You look comfortable." "She's always had a more minimalist style," my mother said, folding her napkin. "Even as a child." "You remember that awful corduroy phase?" They laughed politely as if I weren't sitting right there. Celeste, one of our most experienced servers, approached the table with the amuse-bouche. Her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second before she placed the delicate bite in front of each guest compressed watermelon fermented black garlic, a single microgreen. Not one of them knew it had taken me 3 months to perfect that bite. "Well, this is precious," my father muttered. "It's called an amuse-bouche," I offered. "I know what it's called," Maren snapped. "I just didn't expect something so conceptual. You know, Elira, you've always had that artsy streak. Never quite practical. And still unmarried," my mother added lightly, as if it were an observation rather than a verdict. Lawton stayed quiet, but his fiancée Cecily gave me a small smile. Pity or politeness, I couldn't tell. As the next course was cleared, Jose passed behind me with the wine pairings. He didn't say a word, but the way he lifted the bottle, our reserve Chardonnay, was his own quiet salute. I kept my eyes on the table hands, steady on the linen, while they picked apart my life bite by bite without ever tasting the truth. I used to come home so exhausted my arms would shake unlocking the door. Back then, home was a basement room in a crumbling shotgun house I shared with 3 other women and more roaches than people. The walls sweated in summer, froze in winter, and the stove clicked ominously even when it was off. But it had a lock and a window that caught the morning light. I called that luxury. In those first years, I worked anywhere that would take me. A prep cook at a bistro from 5 to noon. A line cook in Midtown from 1 to 10. Weekends at a bakery where I burned the same patch of my wrist so many times the skin stopped scarring. I kept notebooks in my apron pocket, filling them with sauce ratios, spice combinations, things I overheard chefs mutter under their breath but never explained. Chef Yvette Léon changed everything. She hired me as a kitchen assistant at one of her pop-up tastings in New Orleans. I thought she'd forget me. Instead, she sent for me 3 weeks later. "Your knife work is sloppy," she said by way of welcome. "But your instincts, I'd like to see if they can be sharpened." I worked for her for nearly 2 years. She taught me discipline without cruelty, elegance without ego. "We don't chase applause," she'd say. "We create silence." When guests paused between bites that held breath, that reverence that was the applause that mattered. It was at one of her charity events that I met James Warren. He tried my spring pea risotto and asked who made it. I thought he was just another guest fishing for compliments. Turned out he was a venture capitalist with a soft spot for food that made him feel something. "You ever think of running your own place?" he asked. "Every day." He smiled. "Then stop waiting for permission." 6 months later, the Bellwether opened its doors in Charleston's historic quarter. The space had been a failed jazz bar before I gutted it. I chose the tiles, the linen weight, the curve of every chair. And I kept my name off every article, every profile. Not out of shame, but because I wanted the food to speak first. Now I watched Maren prod at the next course hand-rolled pasta with pancetta and mint, and sigh dramatically. "This is it?" she asked, poking it like it had wronged her. My father squinted at the wine list. "Not a vintage I recognize," he murmured, as if disapproval lent him authority. I said nothing. Not yet. My silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was observation. Let them reveal themselves, I thought, before I show them what I've become. Maren's voice cut back in as she reached for her glass, already bored. "Honestly, Elira, I don't know how you eat at places like this on a cook's salary. The third course had just been cleared when Marin leaned forward, chin resting delicately on the back of her manicured hand, and said it. "Be honest, Elira, can you even afford this place?" It landed softly like so many of her cuts did, but the sting was immediate. I glanced across the table. My mother pretended to adjust her napkin. My father sipped his wine like it was none of his concern. Lawton said nothing. Cecily looked vaguely horrified, which meant she still had some softness left in her. "I manage," I said evenly. Bradley smirked. "So what's the secret, living off credit cards? Or are you dating someone with deep pockets?" I stared at him, then took a slow sip of water. "I'm not dating anyone." He raised an eyebrow. "Then how exactly do you swing a meal like this? It's not exactly Olive Garden." The air thickened. Even Celeste paused as she passed, catching just enough to stiffen before moving on. I looked to Marcus standing discreetly near the service station. Our eyes met for the briefest second. Not yet, I thought. "Let them keep going." "I mean, it's fine," Marin added, lifting her wine glass. "We can split your portion if that makes things easier. It wouldn't be the first time we've had to rescue you." Rescue me. That was rich. From What a Life I Actually Wanted, Bradley pulled out his wallet as Marcus approached with the black leather folder. "Please," he said with a self-satisfied smile. "Let me get this one. Consider it my gift to the family." My father did the expected performance hands half raised a forced, "No, I couldn't possibly," as he leaned back in his chair. Bradley opened the check and paused. I watched the color in his face shift from smug to confused. "Wait, this can't be right," he muttered. "What is it?" Lawton asked. "There's only wine on this bill. No food." That's got to be an error. Marcus stepped forward, calm and precise. "Is there a problem, sir?" "Yes," Bradley said, tapping the paper. "You didn't charge us for the meal." Marcus looked to me. I gave a quiet nod. "There's no error," he said, turning back to Bradley. "The food portion was taken care of by Chef Maddox. For a moment, it didn't register. Then my father blinked. Chef Maddox. Marcus smiled faintly and turned to me. "Your usual table is prepared for your investor meeting, Chef. Would you like me to escort them when you're ready?" Silence spread over the table like smoke. I set down my glass and looked around at them, all of them finally meeting their eyes. "Yes," I said calmly. "Please close out the beverage tab. The rest is on the house." No one spoke. Not right away. Marin stared at me as if I'd just switched languages mid-sentence. Lawton looked between Marcus and me like he'd missed an important cue. My father sat frozen wine glass halfway to his mouth, and my mother's hand went instinctively to her necklace fingers, gripping the pearls she wore like a lifeline. "You own this place?" she asked, voice tight. "Yes," I said simply. "I'm the executive chef and sole proprietor of the Bellwether." "But it's been featured in Bon Appetit," my father said slowly. "And the Times." I nodded. "Last year. 4 stars. "You work here?" Lawton clarified as if that somehow softened the blow. "I built it. They didn't know what to do with that." My mother blinked fast, pulling her expression into something that vaguely resembled pride. "Well," she said, "if you'd told us earlier, we could have celebrated this. We always believed you had potential." I smiled without warmth. "No. You believed in control. You believed in image. You believed in what made sense to you. But you didn't believe in me, not when I needed it." Cecily had the grace to lower her eyes. Lawton shifted uncomfortably. "I left because I couldn't keep shrinking into a version of myself that fit your world," I continued. "And I stayed quiet because I needed to see what kind of people you really were when I wasn't performing for you." Marin scoffed. "So this was some kind of test A-trap to humiliate us." "No," I said. "It was a mirror." Her face flushed. "That's manipulative." I looked at her not with anger, but with something closer to pity. "I needed to know how you'd treat me if you thought I had nothing. And now I do." A memory flashed Chef Yvette pressing a sticky note into my palm with the name of her butcher. The good ones don't just teach you how to cut, they teach you when to walk away. Another James Warren shaking my hand outside a converted jazz bar, his voice low. Make it yours. Every inch. And the first article, a photo of my hand holding a plated fig tart. No face, just the caption, "A new voice in Southern cuisine doesn't speak. She listens with flavor." There were dozens more. My first mentorship program for young chefs. The cookbook I was nearly done writing. The early sketches of a second location I hadn't told anyone about yet. All of it mine. "But why keep it from us?" my mother asked again, her voice slipping into that soft, sweet Southern tone she used in interviews and family crises. "We're your family." I exhaled. "You're right. You are. And if you'd shown me an ounce of respect when you thought I was struggling this night would have looked very different." Marcus returned quietly, setting a small note in front of me, a reminder that the investors had arrived early. I folded it once, then stood from my chair. "Excuse me, I have a business to run." They didn't leave all at once. The table lingered in awkward silence until someone, my mother, I think, reached for her clutch and said too brightly, "Well, this has been quite a surprise." Lawton stood and cleared his throat. "Elira," he said quietly, "for what it's worth, this place. It's incredible. I'm sorry I didn't say that sooner." His voice didn't waver, and for the first time all night he looked at me without calculation. "Thank you," I said. And I meant it. My mother stepped forward, next her tone shifting into performance again. "We should do brunch, something casual, just to the family. Catch up properly now that everything's out in the open." I raised an eyebrow. "Brunch at the club," maybe she offered. "Or wherever you prefer, of course." Cecily gave me a soft smile. "I'd like that, honestly." Then Bradley cleared his throat, clearly eager to reclaim some kind of authority. "Look, I may have come off a little strong earlier," he began. "But this place, what you've built, it's the real deal. And if you ever consider expansion, I know people. We could talk capital franchising models. This restaurant," I interrupted, "is not your social ladder." He blinked. My mother pressed her lips together. No one argued. I let the silence stretch just long enough to sink in before adding, "But I'd be happy to host the rehearsal dinner. As my gift." Marin, who had said nothing since the reveal, looked up with surprise. "You'd do that?" "You're still my sister," I said. "And this place means something to me. If I offer it, it's on my terms, not because I'm trying to win anyone over." She gave a small nod. "Thank you." The staff had already begun to reset the dining room as they filed out their good nights polite, but hurried. As the door closed behind the last of them, I slipped into the back office and pulled out my journal, the one I'd been using for my cookbook draft. Food has always been the only language I trusted I wrote, not for approval, but for clarity, for truth, for home when home wasn't safe. The pen moved more easily now. The words didn't ache like they used to. They tasted clean. They felt mine. I closed the notebook just as Miranda knocked gently on the door. 2 weeks later, I met them for brunch. Not at the club, not at some polished bistro with white tablecloths and bottomless mimosas, but at Alma's, a chef-owned spot tucked between a laundromat and a tattoo parlor where the coffee was strong and the biscuits could make you cry. We sat on mismatched chairs around a table that wobbled slightly, sunlight slanting through chipped blinds. My mother wrinkled her nose at first, but then she took a bite of the sweet potato hash and didn't say another word. Lawton asked about my cookbook. Cecily asked to pre-order. Marin, surprisingly, just listened. It wasn't perfect, but it was quieter, easier. They weren't trying to fix me, and I wasn't performing. For the first time in years, it felt less like a test. That afternoon, I returned to the Bellwether and met with the mentorship group. 8 young chefs in training, wide-eyed and stubborn, reminded me of myself before the bruises and burns. We filleted, fish-tasted sauces, discussed salt the way others discussed poetry. Zoe, one of the youngest, nailed a hollandaise on her first try. When I told her that, her face lit up like someone had handed her the keys to her future. Maybe in a way I had. Later that night, I found a text from Marin. Need advice. No BS. What would you do if the caterer for your bridal shower backed out the night before I smiled and typed back, "Call your sister. She knows someone." Then I opened my notebook to the final page of the manuscript. The last line had been eluding me for weeks, but now it came without force. These aren't just recipes. They are proof you can feed yourself with dignity when the world starves you of it. I closed the journal, walked through the restaurant one last time, and turned off the lights. The room settled into stillness behind me, full of everything I'd built on my own terms in my own time. And for the first time in a long while, I walked home with nothing left to prove.